Welcome to Verbal Pick Radio, where we give you a verbal image of life, and we are everyday people. I'd like to welcome you all to the show. I'd like to thank all of my listeners. I'd like to thank Miss C. What's up, Brother Low Key, Gino, Marcus Mudd, Brother Jamal, so many others, Sister Pebbles, Deborah. What's going on? We're going to do her show in the near future, but, on this show, we bring you information and knowledge like none other. And, we get to the root of what took place and why, so we can have a better understanding. And we give you things that's not or will not be taught right. Now, we're going back into slavery time because that's the time where a lot of things that took place started, and it's been carried into practice till this very day. And we want to get a clear understanding, not only what happened, but how to conquer and defeat what happened. A lot of people don't want to hear this, but we got to tell it as it is. As it states, the truth shall set you free. Now, indentured servitude, because you had whites, especially white women, who were slaves in the tobacco plantations in Virginia. Whites was indentured servant, blacks was indentured servant as well, according to that contract. Matter of fact, a lot of the prisoners that the Queen sent out of Europe to Americas was indentured servant, work out part of their sentence over here as an indentured servant to help farm and, do crops and build to establish the newfound land of the Americas. But the type of brutality once the Caucasian or the Anglo or the colonizer, when they became in power, the brutality and the murder and the number one most crime that was committed was the fact that they refused to allow human beings to know. They refused to allow human beings to read or write, which made them devils, which made them other than human. When you set up a law not to allow a human being his right to know, to read, to write, to discover. And that's what a separation is. Because there's always been indentured servitude, but this was the first case where the brutality and the evil and the hatred and the racism was at this degree in the Americas. So we want to get into the case of John Casor, Casor. And we want to tell you about this young man during the 1600s. Now, I ran across the story while listening to Karimio Ahoy lecture. And I'll read some of this because I want to get it word for word. And it's coming from the Smithsonian magazine, right? Because, hey, we have to know. Now, check this out. Casor was originally an indentured servant, which meant he was particularly a slave in some sense. But what was bought or sold wasn't him. It was his contract of indenture, which obligated him to work for its holder for the period it set. At the end of that time, indentured servants who could be of any race were considered legally free and sent out into the world, depending on the terms of the contract. It could have been 7 years, 10 years, 5 years, or whatnot. Indentured was how the British colonizers who lived in what would later become the United States managed to populate the land and get enough people to do the back-breaking work of farming crops like tobacco in the South. People who survived their period of indenture went on to live free lives in the colonies, often after receiving some kind of small compensation like clothes, land, or tools to help set them up. See, that's how it always was. You finish your time as being an indentured servant, and you had land waiting for you. You had, or it could be money, or it could be whatever would help you to further your aspirations in life. It wasn't promising 40 acres in a mule and didn't deliver on the promises and lie and whatnot. No. See, and that's what happened when the original founders, when they started letting the low civilized whites have control, then the honor system wasn't there anymore. So all honor was out the window. So the brutality, the raping, the murder had begun. But let's finish. That was the incentive that caused many poor whites to indenture themselves and their families and move to the so-called New World. But Africans who were indentured were often captured and brought over against their will. That's what happened to the holder of Casor's indenture, Anthony Johnson. Johnson served out his contract and went on to run his own tobacco farm and hold his own indentured servants, among them Casor. At this time, the colony of Virginia had very few black people in it. Johnson was one of the original 20. See, in Virginia, this was original 20 that was captured off a ship enlisting to Kermue Oha, was stating how they were captured when the ship was seized. And that first 20 blacks who they, according to the story, were sent to Virginia. Wasn't that many there. But after they indentured themselves, they were able to get land, and they also had slaves themselves. Now, after a disagreement about whether or not Casor's contract was lapsed, a court ruled in favor of Johnson, and Casor saw the status of his indenture turn into slavery. And this was the first slave. Were he not, his contract was considered property. Casor claimed that he had served his indenture of 7 or 8 years and 7 more years on top of that. The court sided with Johnson, who claimed that Casor was his slave for life. And that's where the problem began. That's the divide and conquer. That's the old hoodwink and bamboozle, where the same old story where they use one of your own to capture one of your own. So Casor became the first person to be arbitrarily declared a slave for life in the U.S. Wow. Of course, as Wesleyan University notes, the transatlantic slave trade from Africa to the Americas had been around for over a century already, originating around 1500, we say 1550 or 1555. Slaves usually captured and sold by other African tribes were transported across the Atlantic to the Americas. The University blog notes, around 11 million people were transported from 1500 to 1850, mostly to Brazil and the Caribbean islands. If they arrived in America, originally they became indentured servants. If they arrived elsewhere, they became slaves. Now, a lot of the slaves, what they call slaves, which only a small percentage came out of Africa, they was enslaving the black natives that was already here in the Americas. Casor's story is particularly grim in hindsight. His slip into slavery would be followed by many, many other people of African descent who were declared property in what became the United States. It was a watershed moment in the history of institutional slavery. See, after John Casor's case, then they were like, well, you know what, we capture slaves out of Africa or wherever. Once they became slaves, they'll be our property for life. And that's where that began. About 7 years later, Virginia made this practice legal for everyone in 1661 by making it state law for any free white, black, or Indian to be able to own slaves, along with indentured servants. The step from there to a racialized ideal of slavery wasn't a huge one. She writes, and by the time Johnson died in 1670, his race was used to justify giving his plantation to a white man rather than Johnson's children by his wife, Mary. He was not a citizen of the colony. A judge ruled because he was black. Wow. You see what I'm saying? Wow. This man died. Couldn't leave his property. They gave it to a white man. Why? Why so? Well, reason being is, at one point you had white, you had black, or you had Negro, which the Indians rotated in between Negro and black. And what happened was the white slaves were seeing the white overseers and the white plantation owners and was like, hey, man, we got something coming. We are from Europe. We are white. Why are we working alongside of these blacks and these quote unquote Indians, which was Native Americans, which was black as well? Why are we working alongside of them? And so the plantation owner was like, well, I'll tell you what, I'll pull you out of the field, out of slavery, and make you the overseer, and you watch over the blacks and the natives. Right? Now the blacks was like, hey, why don't you whites unite, you white slaves and indentured servant, unite with us and we can overthrow and we run the whole shebang. But no, because the race card was so appetizing to where we're going to work this thing based on color and we'll always suppress the black and the Native American. All after John Casor lost that case to a matter of fact, he lost the case to Johnson was a black man who took another black man to court, and the judge ruled in the black plantation owner's favor to make John Casor, a slave for life. And yet there it begins. After that, and you were set up. Both of them were set up. Whether they knew it or not, both of them was played. Because once you start fighting amongst yourselves, all else goes out the window. Everything, because they didn't see any difference between, it was just the race. You betray your race, you fight against your race, then your race has no leg to stand on. So they put everybody went to slavery because there was no unity. Verbal Pick Radio, we're out.